Started. Good morning. I hope everybody enjoyed the keynote. Emily Hanford's information and her reporting is so amazing, so I hope you enjoyed that. We are excited to have you here for Francine Dutrisac's presentation on the impact of Oracy on elementary English learners' language and literacy development. And there are a couple of housekeeping items I just want to go through before we start. If you could all just make sure your videos are turned off. I know if you've been participating for the past couple of days, you know the drill. If you could just turn off your videos and mute yourselves, that would be helpful to minimize distractions. Also, I wanted to remind you the handouts are housed on Schoology in today's folder, the date with today's folder and this presentation session. This is a 75-minute recorded session, and the recording will be available on Patton's YouTube channel in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. Your chat, the chat feature is on. You'll be able to chat with Francine and I, and then Francine's going to stop periodically to take questions that are in the chat, and I will be monitoring those as well. And then, of course, if you are interested in social media and you do any sort of tweeting, if you could just tweet some things about the symposium, that would be wonderful. So without further ado, here is Mrs. Francine Dutrisac. She is a patent educational consultant and serves as the state lead for English learners. She has more than 25 years of experience in the ESL field. She has served as a preschool teacher, K-12 ESL teacher, ESL coach, adult ESL teacher, parent educator, assessment coordinator, and Title III program coordinator. She has also worked as an ESL technical assistance facilitator on behalf of the Pennsylvania Department of Education. She has been employed as an adjunct professor for Shippensburg University, where she has taught several of the ESL program specialist certificate course requirements. She holds 2 master's degrees, a master's in library science and a master's in curriculum and instruction. Her master's thesis focused on the adjustment of migrant children in schools. She currently volunteers to teach entry-level adult ESL to recent immigrants in her community and tutors candidates preparing for the naturalization process on a one-to-one basis. Welcome, Francine.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be addressing Oracy on for elementary English language learners as it impacts language and literacy development. I am so thankful to have assisted to the opening session this morning. The keynote speaker just laid it out so nicely for this session. I would be remiss if I didn't address Patton's mission, which is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. And we need to remind ourselves that the PDE's commitment to least restrictive environment is as such, that our goal for each child is to ensure individualized education program teams begin with the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. Our learning intentions for today is twofold. Connect the strands of the Scarborough rope to English language development principles and examine a framework for oral language production and development at the elementary level. Before we get started, I know that's not been done in anywhere, I don't think, but I created a poll, if I can find it now. I'm not having the same view as I did before. Let's see if I can find the poll. I'm going to go old school. So if you look at your Zoom tabs, you have the option of chatting. Would you be so kind as to tell me what is your role in your school? That to me will be helpful in addressing my the session with that lens. And also, if you could tell me if you are dealing with low incidence of L's in your district, where you have less than 20 students that are English learners, or if you have like what is called a mid-range program, where you have more than between 25 and 900, and then are you an urban setting where you have, a good portion of your students are English learners or come from culturally responsive, culturally and linguistically diverse background? That would be very helpful to me. Thank you. I see that you're responding. So I see substitute teacher, urban, mid-range, Title I, dyslexia reading interventionist. That's going to be very helpful, very helpful. I see ESL facilitator. So I have ESL teachers, yes. Sometimes I think the literacy symposium does not draw ESL teachers enough, in my opinion. All right, thank you. So to get us grounded in this session, I wanted to ground it by saying that all learning takes place through language. And it takes place in a social context. And the best way to do so is by creating classroom environments and activities with abundant opportunities for purposeful student collaboration and discussion. English learners, different research will say that English learners in a typical day produce language somewhere between 2% and 5% of their day is engaging in productive speech, productive language, either speaking or writing. That's not enough to grow our English learners. So it's really important to remember that they will learn best when it's collaborative between students more than it is between teacher and students. So how do we do that? Well, the interaction with others has to be owned by the learner. It has to be set up in a way that invites students to engage in activities with others that are, the process is likened to an apprenticeship where we learn by being engaged with other students that may have more English than we do. So the importance of having English learners interact with native English speakers is very important. Then the teacher has to provide models of how to behave in a group setting, in a dyad or triad or small group setting, and then provide the supports that they will need to practice the language, and eventually over time, they will own those practices for themselves. So the best way that English learners learn is when English language development emerges in social interaction. The more they use the language, the more their language will grow. Quality learning interactions have to be well thought of and to be deliberately and contingently scaffolded. Quality learning has to be focusing on disciplinary practices by creating tasks where students are engaging in interactions that will grow their depth of knowledge as well as their language. It's like a two-way street, and it has to be generative. During quality learning tasks, English learners can't be logs. They need to have a role, they need to play a role so that they can develop both conceptual, analytical, and language practices. Language is central to those social interactions. It's the means by which learners can co-construct knowledge. I know something, my peer, my colleague, the other student with whom I'm working has another piece, may have another facet, is bringing background knowledge that is different from mine, and together we are co-constructing knowledge. We are bigger than our parts. When language is disciplinary focused, the learners are learning to appropriate, own the discourse necessary to communicate their opinions, ideas, and how to show evidence of that is typical to the content area or discipline. So the benefit of these learning interactions is that in order to achieve that benefit, conceptual, analytical, and language practices have to be rich and stimulating. They need to generate more language. They need to be open-ended. And why do we need to do all that? Well, because now English learners more than ever through the college and career readiness standards the expectations are way more than they used to be. They have to engage critically with complex texts. They have to show evidence to support their opinion or their conclusions. They need to be able to evaluate information to determine if it's valid, and be able to evaluate arguments and counter arguments of others to determine if they're valid. Be able to present their viewpoints or their ideas orally in writing, and the importance of developing, not only for English learners, and some of you are probably saying all this in your mind already, that what I'm sharing with you is applicable to a whole lot more learners than just English learners. But the paradigm shift that I'm going to recommend that you use is that if it works for English learners, it'll work for other learners. But if you start with best practice for all kids, often they don't necessarily will apply to English learners, simply because we are not taking the linguistic load into consideration when we're thinking of best practices. So let's situate this conversation within the MTSS model. The Pennsylvania MTSS model has changed. The logo has changed just recently, but I wanted to show to you that it's now embedded in equitable access for all students. So when you're looking at the MTSS model, it has the potential of being very effective for English learners as a mechanism to look at for making data informed instructional decisions, identifying and meeting the needs of English learners, and in tier 1, because that's usually where, when I'm asked to go in a district to look at their practices, this is usually at tier 1 where I see issues when it relates to English learners. The tier 1 is the issue. They are already implementing interventions, but if your tier 1 is not good, then everything else is kind of falling apart. It's that foundation. So what does that look like? What does the MTSS model look like? Well, there are two pieces to it, as well as social emotional learning. That is more the culturally responsive piece of that triangle right here, social emotional learning. But there's an academic system and a behavior system. On the behavior system, one thing that we need to remind ourselves is that is different for English learners is the acculturation process. Often that's overlooked. English learners, when they first come to this country, go through a process of acculturation, understanding how and the whole American culture and how to best function in American culture. So more time will need to be focused on ensuring that they have the background knowledge that other students in the classroom have in the literacy, in whatever reader that you're using, to ensure that they are having understanding if there are cultural pieces that are different from their own culture. And the other piece is that we need to ensure that families and communities are engaged so that they have an understanding of their role in the education of their children, which is not an international understanding. Here we see families as playing a role of a team member in the education of their children, whereas in other countries, that is not the role they play. Tier 1, in order to be effective, it has to be whatever we're using to teach literacy has to be appropriate research-based reading instruction and interventions that are designed for English learners. Not everything that is out there has been normed with English learners. So ensuring that what we're doing is appropriate and valid for English learners is your first piece. As I shared before, culturally responsive practices. Culturally responsive teachers seek information on the features of that first language and the cultures of their children. So, like ensuring that kids have access to books that look like them, not a book about that may be for the general population, but if you have Mexican children in your classroom, ensuring that they have access to books that look like them. That's Eugene Garcia has coined the word, the phrase, provide mirrors to your children, to your students, and windows. So yes, they need to learn about the American culture, but they need to be able to say, that's me, as they look at a book. So when you do use a book that's like them, your student engagement will soar, because they are recognizing themselves and not looking through a window, but they're seeing a mirror. Again, I'm saying you need to provide both. Of course, we want them to continue to grow their knowledge of the world. And it has to include English language development instruction. We'll talk about what that looks like a little bit later, but the bottom line is that there has to be collaboration built in between the ESL teacher and the classroom teacher in order to be focusing on the same language, the same topics, so that you're coordinated and aligned, so that ELD instruction is just not a separate curriculum that's not at all aligned to the standards, the ELA standards. The two need to go hand in hand. And finally, ensuring that when the assessments that you're using, the screening tools, the progress monitoring tools, that the tools that you're using, that an EL population was considered in the development of those tools. Otherwise, your assessments and progress monitoring tools are not going to be valid for that population. First and foremost, teachers need to have professional development to understand first and second language development. They are different. Think of the fact that your kindergartners, English learners that are coming to kindergarten, have language comprehension in their first language, not English necessarily, or they may have um, learned some English in their community, but it's not the language at the level that necessary for them to read. If you look at the simple view of reading, it's decoding. English learners will develop decoding skills, but the piece that's missing for reading comprehension is the language comprehension, the language development in English. So ensuring that you understand that, for example, an English learner at level 1, at the entering level, will not be able to comprehend text at the same level that a native speaker will. So in a nutshell, for English learners, we need to have a greater understanding of language and literacy development within and across languages to provide effective language and literacy instruction for English learners. Here we are with the Scarborough rope. You all were at the session this morning, so I'm going to give just, I'm going to barely touch on it because it's already been addressed so well by our speaker this morning, by Emily Hartford. But what I wanted to show you is that in order to be a skilled reader as an English learner, two strands have to be taken into consideration: the word recognition strand and the language comprehension strand. Research on English learners that were, all the studies that were meta study of all the research on English learners that was published by the National Literacy Panel said, yes, English learners do need to learn to phonics. They need the word level skills. But in order for them to become skilled readers, this often is lacking for them. The piece, the language comprehension piece, is not developed enough for them to become skilled readers. So what we see in 3rd grade, 4th grade, when text becomes more difficult and when the pictures, as Emily shared this morning, starts to be fewer and fewer, English learners are name calling. They're able to decode words and are able to pronounce the words, but they're lacking comprehension. So the thesis of this session is to tell you that in order for English learners to become skilled readers, we need to spend more time on that side of the strand. So the reading first talked about the development of literacy using this pyramid. We do a lot of pyramids in education, and here's one. By the way, this presentation is the work of, is my work and my 2 colleagues who were not able to be with me today, but I do want to give a shout out to Ana Sainz de la Peña and Paula Zucker for this work that we have done as a team. So for native English speakers, we are focusing on the word level skills first, then the sentence level, and then we focus on story. While for English learners, that pyramid is has to be upside down. We have to build the language comprehension. We have to work at ensuring that the background knowledge is sufficient for them to be successful, and then focus on the phonics that are in the sentence level and the phonics for them to be successful. And we did want to address, hold on a second, I've got to go back to my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. One thing that I did want to mention is that English learners who are literate in their first language are advantaged. So if for English learners that come to you in 4th or 5th grade that are literate in their first language, they will have broken their code in the code of reading in their first language and will transfer many of those skills to the second language. So if you have the ability to teach literacy in the first language first, that would be beneficial. But if your program does not allow for that, it doesn't mean that it can't be done, but it has to be focusing on both sides of that Scarborough rope. So again, I don't know how much you know about the WIDA performance definitions or English language development, but I wanted to at least share this tool that focuses on what English learners are able to do at all the different levels of proficiency when they come to you after being identified as an English learner. So when you hear, and this is good for K-12, I'm showing you the listening and reading performance definitions, the receptive skills, and I am now showing you the speaking and writing performance definitions, which are the productive domains. Because we're focusing more on productive, I'm going to address, well, let me do this first. So what I said earlier is if you have let me backtrack. So for English learners, when you're looking at their language, you have to always consider their sociocultural context for processing language. And it follows in 3 categories. What does they are processing language at the discourse dimension, which is the linguistic complexity or more at the paragraph level. What does it look like at the sentence level, which is more the language forms and conventions of language. And then the vocab usage, which is more at the word or phrase dimension. But I'm not going to read through, but if you just would compare the level 1 entering in linguistic complexity versus level 5, where they're usually pretty close to the level of a native English speaker, you're going to see that their language, their production of language at the level 1 is not at the ID level with details. It's like words, phrases, chunks of language, sometimes without morphological markers. And then look at the top where they're able to use discourse that's complex with complex sentences. They can have cohesive and organized related ideas. So when they're reading, in listening and reading, they're not producing language. They're just able to listen and read. It's going to be, even when you have an English learner that is in 3rd grade, they're going to be learning to read, but it'll be the very, very basic. Okay? Then grammatical constructions, they are starting with WH questions. So responding to the WH questions or declaratives is going to be what they're going to be able to do at level 1, compared to compound complex grammatical constructions, broad level sentence patterns. I'm looking at my time and I'm going too slow. So I'm going to move on. So for speaking and writing, when they're producing speech, again, it's very similar to the receptive skills. It's quite limited at the beginning and need to be scaffolded with a lot of supports for levels 1, 2, and 3, remove the scaffolds at level 4 and 5 because they are now at level 3, they're concrete, able to do concrete thinking with short expanded sentences, for example, repetitive grammar structures, occasional variation. They're starting at the vocab level to be able to use specific content language, but and to use multiple meaning words across content areas. So they're going to need more supports. So let me just go quickly through those. Wanted to talk to you about word recognition, what English learners, what you need to be aware of as you teach word level skills. And then I'll talk about the second portion of that Scarborough rope later. What is one thing you heard so far that you plan to share with a colleague? Can you place that in your chat box, in the chat box? What is one thing you heard so far? And if you have questions, this is now a time that I'm going to use to clarify anything or draw your attention to anything.
Francine, there is one question from Eileen. Do you know of structured literacy programs that are appropriate for ELD instruction?
Yes, and I will provide you with my email address, and I will give you the link to it. Is there any way we can do that, Jen, in this? I had thought that question would come, and I did not put that in this PowerPoint because it's so short.
Do you want your email address in
my
the chat?
email address is fdutrisac, F as in Francine, Dutrisac as my last name, D as in Donald, UTRIS as in Sam, AC @patent.net.
All right, I just put it in the chat for everyone.
Okay.
Also, there's a question about progress monitoring. Let's see here. What progress monitoring is normed for ELs?
Okay, so there is a website, it's called Intensive Reading Interventions. And if you look for, if you look down that list, you will find those. They have charts of progress monitoring tools, screening tools, reading programs. You're going to have to go back to your district and look at the teacher manual and see how was it developed. Because my concern is that often publishers tell you that they are, that this is good for ELs, and what we see is that the EL version is usually a separate, you know, like an addition to the program. And what you're seeing is stories that have very little language. We need to amplify and not simplify language for them. Okay, I'm gonna move on. And again, email me. I would love to continue to talk. I love what you learned. So I wish I had more time because it's making me, it makes my heart sing to see that you're learning something. Okay. Teacher, always a teacher, right? So one thing that I somehow lost in this PowerPoint is in your handouts, there is a whole section on contrastive analysis that I'm missing in these slides. And I want to say to you that they are gold. And what I'm going to do is, let me do a new share. Okay, hold on here. appreciate your patience. I'm going to open another one that somehow I managed to lose the. So I'm talking about contrastive analysis. It's not there either. Okay. This one will, okay. Are you seeing contrastive analysis, Jen?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So what contrastive analysis, so to make the importance of supporting English learners beyond what we offer other students in our classroom is because of this. There are differences between the first language and English in all kinds of areas, as mentioned here. So for example, in Spanish, students cannot pronounce words like street, skill, special correctly. They add the phoneme e to the beginning of the word because in Spanish you say especial, estudiante. They don't have, in Spanish, there's no initial phoneme of s. So because that sound is not in their first language, they will need to be taught that sound. And there's this tool that is wonderful. So I'm going to share a few slides about this. It's I think 16 pages that is mentioned down below. There are first language to the second language. That would be the first place to go to build to support your literacy instruction. But if you like, I know you can't see very clearly here, but just take my word that there will be sounds or phonemes that will not transfer from one language to the other, and those will need more attention. That chart only focuses, I mean, I have several charts. This article focuses on 6 languages, which are Spanish, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Haitian Creole, Hmong, and Korean, and they compare it to English. And what that helps you do is realize that if the sound is not in the first language, more instruction will need to happen for the student to appropriate that sound. Now you go, well, actually I saw in the chat that you have some of your districts have way more than those 6 languages represented in your student population. What I would recommend you do then is that you do an internet search on contrastive analysis and the specific language you're looking for. Some you will find, some you won't. Sometimes you have a student that has a language, comes from a very small population of those speakers, and there are not going to be that much available. But the other thing I wanted to say is that the importance of realizing that there are different stages of sound transfers. So for example, if you're trying to teach the alphabet and you have a Spanish speaker, you know that the B as in boy and V as in violin, no, that's not a good vase, is going to be difficult for them to identify because they sound the same to them. So in Spanish. So doing minimal pair, doing more work to develop those will be helpful. Okay, again, I'm going too deep. Sound symbol matches, again, it's the same chart. Then you have grammar transfers. Often English learners will make grammatical errors due to interference from the first language. So for example, you all probably know this, but just in case, in Spanish, the adjective follows the noun. So often English learners will say the house green instead of the greenhouse, and that will be because it's a transfer. So identifying that for them will be very helpful for them. So what do you do when you see that there might be possible student errors? You highlight the transferable skills, you pre-teach the non-transferable skills, and you're going to have to provide additional practice and time for students to master those concepts. I'm going to have to go back to the PowerPoint because that was the same one that I was going to use. Okay. New share. Here we go. So we're back to the Scarborough rope, and we're going to spend the rest of our time looking at this strand. So for an English learner to be able to be a skilled reader, the two sides of that rope have to be highly present in the instruction. And often when we talk about background knowledge, well, I'm speaking ahead of myself. Here we go. So the first thing we need to know, hold on a second. Something happened to my PowerPoint. Yes, okay, let's try what, I'm gonna go to the other one. I don't know what, I have overlap between the first talk and the second talk, and I'm missing pieces. It's a good thing I remember. So language comprehension, as I said before, is not about simplifying text for them. It's about amplifying text. And the best way to do that is to scaffold the language by providing different entry points, providing a lot of visuals, sensory, graphic, interactive supports, providing opportunities for them to talk about it, to develop oracy before they have to do literacy, and providing those English learners with frequent constructive feedback. Are you seeing my new share? I don't know if I did. Are you seeing a language comprehension screen, Jen?
Yep, that starts with amplify, don't simplify.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So for background knowledge, it's really important to realize that what it is all the information we've stored in long-term memory from direct or indirect life experiences. Here's an opportunity for another chat talk. Which of these building background knowledge strategies or world knowledge strategies is the highest yielding for English learners? So before you answer, let me talk about those, and then we'll open up the chat for you to respond. It's not uncommon for English learners to come with a different background knowledge to a text than the native English speaker born here in the United States. So it's really important for us to acknowledge that and think about what is the background knowledge that the English learners have in relation to whatever we're going to be addressing. What's the theme? Is there cultural considerations that need to be addressed? For example, I remember Sonia Nieto wrote a book, and the book talked about how important it is to be culturally responsive. And one of them is, for example, if the story talks about an attic, many of our students, not only our English learners, would not know what an attic looks like. So, or talking about foods and eating healthy foods, and none of the foods that are being addressed are reflecting the populations of our English learners. Another presenter once said, I thought my mom was poisoning me because I wasn't eating anything from the food pyramid in those days. So the importance of ensuring that students have the background knowledge to be able to understand, comprehend the story is really important. To be honest, without background knowledge, there is no entry point in the lesson. We have not given the student a hook for learning. So it's important to consider what activities can I incorporate in my lesson to develop the background knowledge so that DLs will be able to comprehend the story. Okay, chat, which one of those will have the most, yield the most benefit if we provide that in our background knowledge building? Connected to political, social, and historical context, connected to personal experience, connected to facts and references, word meaning, concepts, and academic disciplines. Yay! I have an informed group here. Most of you said personal experiences. You are correct. For native speakers, it's connecting it to previous learning, but for English learners, it's personal experiences. And it has to do with relevance. If I'm teaching about Rosa Parks, even though you give me information about the Jim Crow's law that were, that have been taught in previous years, English learners will not have that background knowledge. It has to be a personal link. Thank you. Vocabulary has, for one thing that often is not necessarily done, but I'm seeing that that's changing from the presentations I've attended in the last 2 days. But the biggest piece for vocabulary is that we have to make the kids say the word. For English learners, that is essential. We need to have them practice to say the words orally. For English learners, it's important that we don't memorize word lists, not even look for definitions, but look at creating meaningful activities so students can practice listening, speaking, reading, and writing those words, and appropriate again the new vocabulary. This is probably going without saying, but English learners are going to need way more opportunities to practice the new vocabulary in context to appropriate those words than would native speakers. And the importance of signaling the cognates. Hispanics are the highest number of L's in Pennsylvania. I think it's like 70%. So the importance of showing English learners what is similar, a word that's used similarly in their first language will help create hooks for them as well. Language structures. This is what ESL teachers teach. Language functions and forms. Looking at more and more, we're moving in the ESL world from sentence stems to formulaic expressions. The difference is that sentence stems are very content specific, and formulaic expressions are more generalized, where they will be able to be used across content. So for example, let's think of one like that wasn't part of my notes. Think of, for example, blah, blah, blah. in conclusion, blah, 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 things that they will need to be using, the discourse that will be needed to be used across content is better than one where it says, in this story, Rosa Parks blank, where it's way too specific. That's a sentence stem versus a formulaic expression. It's also about teaching syntax, social registers. What does the register for school is different from the one in my neighborhood, and teaching language functions. ELs need ample opportunities to use oral language to present viewpoints, discuss, compare, contrast, and be able to express their ideas. So transfer, so that they can transfer what they learned in listening and speaking to reading and writing. They need to be taught. Inferring is a high skill that is more, will develop later in language development, but it needs to be explained and taught because inferences often by authors refer to a common background knowledge between the author and its audience and his or her audience, okay? I will have to go back to the other PowerPoint now. I apologize for that. That's what happens when you make changes to your PowerPoint first thing in the morning. Here's your chance to chat for a chat box. How do you find out about the literacy development of your English learner in L1? Concepts such as print concepts, genres of literatures transfer fairly easily from one language to the other. So it's really important to know what your English learner's first language literacy skills are. So my question for you is, do you know how that data is collected in your LEA? And I'm going to ask ESL teachers not to respond because you know this. This is part of our, of what we do. But I would like to hear more from the content teachers if they know how that's gathered, and if you as a content teacher know how to access that data. I'm going to give you a few, I only see 3 people that responded. I'm going to give you a little bit more time. Oh, still, maybe people don't know. Okay. Parent interviews, do not know if it's collected. Parent interviews, correct. Parent interviews is a beginning point, part of the identification process, the Pennsylvania Department of Education identification process for determining if a student is an English learner or not, includes a family interview, and that would give you some information, but another thing to consider is report cards. And if you're really concerned about possibilities of a reading issue, you may consider using the Core Manual for Spanish Language Assessment. Again, the Core, C-O-R-E, all caps, Manual for Spanish Language Assessment that will allow you to informally assess your students' literacy skills if they are Spanish speakers. So now that we've done the rope, how do we go about developing oral language? The development of the spoken forms of language are essential for English learners as a bridge. That's the bottom line. If you leave here knowing that in order for English learners to become skilled readers, you remind yourself of the importance of embedding listening and speaking at a higher rate than you would with native speakers the better. Create a language-rich environment that includes modeling and scaffolding of oral language with ample opportunities to practice. It's not only telling them about it, they need tons of opportunities to practice what they're learning. The other piece that we need to realize is that English learners, when they are reading, if we haven't done a good job of building that oral language, their working memory gets overtaxed. So in order for them to process both language comprehension and decoding, in order to be a skilled reader, there's just not enough real estate in the brain to do both at the same time. So when we spend more time on Oracy, it's more likely to look more like this. There's not as much focus on comprehending, and is more likely to create comprehension. This is a framework that was offered by Judith Dotson in a book called 50 Nifty Activities for Reading Instruction. And it's, you know, one thing that we need to realize is that not only, and I'm sure some of you are going, Francine, it's very similar to other kids that I have in my class that need the development of the language of school. They are developing language, period, especially in the early grades. But this is one way of approaching oral language instruction. I've talked about it already in many ways, but it's an easy acronym to remember. It's BLISS. Make sure you're building background knowledge. Teach kids to listen actively and speak responsibly about the topic. Integrate the new to the old knowledge. Provide tons of opportunities for them to discuss, sort, create, write, and help them to share what they know. Again, multiple, it's a redundancy in using the language so that they are able to appropriate it. So who needs to do that? All classroom teachers and students all day, every day. Focus on creating opportunities for purposeful talk. And as Anita Archer talked about, use your rich and robust language as a model. You're probably, in some cases, you're the best model of English that they have access, that they can access. So the importance of, again, my book, this is a good picture because at the heart of literacy is oral language. I have 15 minutes. So I'm going to run through these slides, focusing on things you already know. Usually in a situation, teacher-centered interactions the classroom environment looks similar to this, where you're looking for, you ask a question, and you're expecting a response by some students, and then you provide feedback, or you're asking questions that are funneling them to a predetermined answer, or you're having them highlight key ideas that you've addressed before. It's more to summarize and build on students' ideas toward a common understanding. That's typical, there's a place for it, but realize that we need to also consider providing more opportunities for them English learners to be engaged. In this picture, you see one student with his hand up, while the others are just looking down. Don't know if they're engaged, don't know if they even looked for the answer, or so on and so forth. I know this is this is typical and you've heard it before, but I wanted to just address it clearly here. Here's another opportunity for you to look over this list. English learner and engagement and teacher interactions. I'm going to give you a little bit of information, and what I would like you to do is, from the list I'm going to address with you, which one of those do you do frequently, and which one are you planning on doing more? I'm sorry, is there one? I know you do many of those and you might be able to go like this, but is there one of them in this list that you're going to determine moving forward that you're going to focus more as we move forward? So one thing that happens when English learners are not responding to teacher prompt questions is sometimes you just don't understand the question. So ensuring that your question is clear, or having a student repeat what you said in other words, is important. Wait time may not be long enough for students to consider the question and respond. When I was an ESL coach, I remember seeing a classroom of students in a small group setting, and the teachers asking questions, and I can see the English learner in that group like engaged. The body language is like, I want to learn, I'm here to learn. And the teacher is asking questions and the students are responding quickly, and the English language learner's body language just goes like this and goes, I can't play here, I can't participate, wait time is not long enough. First language learners are largely motivated to participate because there's an intrinsic desire in them to socialize. So they are more likely to respond. But for an English learner, there needs to be an extrinsic motivation to participate. So what that means is that, first of all, they don't know if they have enough English. They don't know if they have the right skills, the right answer to start with. So 3 motivational components have to be considered in order for them to progress. And this is Lily Wong Fillmore's work. Is the topic relevant or culturally responsive? Is there, like, do they think they have something to share? Are they able to turn and talk and access somebody that has more English than they do, so they have time to practice their response? And finally, is the environment so that all kids are welcomed and mistakes are not laughed at, and so on and so forth? And that there are relationships not only between English learners, but English learners and native speakers or more proficient speakers. Higher order thinking. In many cultures, they don't understand why the teacher is asking questions that they know the answer already. For them, it's like, why are you, so it goes to higher expectations for kids. But higher order thinking, not always asking questions that are right there, but asking them to make connections to self or to the world itself. And finally, cultural differences. Immigrant students come from other cultures that don't expect teachers to ask questions from them. The teachers are more the imparters of knowledge. So teaching them that this is different here. And then the bottom line, where are they in the English language development level, where they may be asked to produce too much language, where we could ask them to respond in imperfect language, focusing on meaning rather than form, or as I said before, turn and talk, because all kids have more receptive language than they have productive language. Sure. I am aware that I have 10 minutes, so I want to make sure that, yes, somebody said increase the use of triads when possible is a big one, because in a dyad, there's always I don't, it's not me. I'm quoting somebody that shared that with me, but I don't know who that is. In a dyad, there's always a hog and a log. And if you place an English learner with a native speaker, the hog tends to be the native speaker and the English learner tends to be the log. So providing opportunity for both to speak seems to be more difficult than when it's in a triad. It seems like the floor is shared more evenly between the three. So I'm not going to ask you to respond here. I'm sorry. Here's another opportunity for you to talk, but so I'll have you think about it. When you ask a question during whole group instruction, what do you do when the English learner remains silent? So the next slide talks to you about what happens when our English learners respond. You may have kids that are like English learners that are going, I want to talk. And they are, when you ask for them to respond, they may fall somewhere. They may have the appropriate or correct response, or they may be unable to maybe responding in one of those 5 manners. So when they are correct, be sure to praise them and encourage them to elaborate on their response. So sometimes they'll just be able to give you a piece, but if you ask a following question, they are able to, with your guidance, respond more. A partially correct response, value their contribution, reinforce the correct portion, but then help them attempt to refine the response. Sometimes their prior knowledge or their world knowledge comes into play here, but they may be slightly off. For example, to get ready for this session, I read an article where the teacher asked a question from an EL. They were about to focus on the topic of sharks. And the little boy said, I've had an experience with sharks. My sister swam with sharks. So it's approximation rather than sharks, he meant dolphins. But, a teacher knowing this would be able to say, are you sure it's sharks? Did it have a fin? Or was it this? And show a picture of a dolphin. Sometimes the student may have an incorrect or inappropriate response, and the question then is to determine, is it language-based or is it content-based? He or she may not have the language may have the understanding of the content, but may not have the language to respond. And sometimes the student will respond in their native language. I don't know if any of you are uncomfortable when that happens, but realize if they're responding, they comprehended what you said in English. They just don't have the English yet to produce it in English, but they are on task. When kids speak their first language, they're usually on task. It's just one way for them to process what you're teaching. And then the no response, you may have kids that are, that may say no response, they're silent, or they might say, I don't know. And if you move forward, that's a problem, because then they're off the hook. So some ways to address that would be, first of all, to communicate the belief that all students are able to contribute more and maintain high expectations for all students. Waiting a few more seconds. They're not the only ones that may have a need for more processing. doing proximity, moving closer to the student, so it's a conversation between you and the student and not the whole group, or asking for other contributions from the students around them, and then coming back to see if there's something that that student can contribute. One thing that you need to be aware is that when they'll say they don't know, they may be saying, I don't know enough English to respond, to express that in English. So you could ask them, if you know they're level 1 or 2, maybe by asking them to demonstrate or draw their responses would be one way to get around it. So I have 3 minutes, so I'm going to just say that much of our conversation in the next slides would be addressing productive talk formats. So when it's student-centered, where the teacher's facilitating and walking around the room, there is more likelihood for oral language development. Here are slides telling you what it is and what it is not. When I talked about formulaic language, here's some. So you're saying, put another way, you're saying, I agree, so on and so forth. This is a really good video clip to address Oracy in the classroom. Obviously, we will not have time to do that. If you are in grades 4 and above, this is an evidence-based practice curriculum or support, more an intervention than anything that could be used in tier 1 called word generation. And I provided you with a lot of resources below, but wanted to leave you with this. By some estimates, ELs spend less than 2% of their school day in oral interaction. Teachers must find ways to provide students learning opportunities that engage them in productive talk, and then listen carefully to the language they use in order to support their continued growth. There are two resources I wanted to share with you that I've highlighted in blue here. The go-to strategies for scaffolding is an excellent resource from the Center for Applied Linguistics. And another one that I just found, which is if we are going virtual in the fall and we still need to do packets, they are full of wonderful PDF of all kinds of strategies. Any comments or questions as we move to our end, to my end?
Well, they have your email address
Yes.
again on this.
And my phone number, actually in the summertime and in teleworking situations, I am available both ways. So if I created some question or you would like to have a longer conversation with me, please continue to reach out to me. I would love to continue the conversation. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.